Hi and welcome back. I am still Rob Walton. And in my last video, I introduced myself and I told you a little bit about my career in comics and in animation, going back further than I like to admit. But looking on the positive side, I'm in the prime of my artistic career and producing the best work I've ever done in Ragmop, The World Needs Laughter. And today's video, I thought I would introduce you, before we talk about the sequel, let's talk about the original Ragmop, A Brief History of Crime. Nice little book designed by John Adams. And instead of me talking about my own work and just going on for the next hour and a half, I'll just read to you a portion of what Frank Plowright wrote about Ragmop in 1001 Comics You Must Read Before You Die. I hope holding that up is not going to be like a copyright strike, but let's go with it. Unfortunately, I can't show you any of my animation work because that would be struck very quickly. But here it is. Here is Ragmop on page 640. So it is in the book. And so let's hear what Frank has got to say for himself, and I suppose about me. Ragmop begins 248 million years ago and encompasses intelligent dinosaurs, a missing physicist, a Vatican assassin, Adolf Hitler, assorted U.S. covert agents, some of whom may have grassy knoll credentials, a fighting misogynistic psychiatrist, say that 5 times fast, the missing link, a giant rabbit with a gun, a controversial portrayal of God, and a device that can reset the known universe, and that's merely the half of it. Gluing everything together is the adaptable Alice Hawkings, whose career as a second-rate criminal is not paying off. Political lectures are presented in superhero tropes. Background information is delivered in the form of old-style Marvel Comics pin-up pages. And irrespective of how chaotic this seems, creator Rob Walton never loses control. For sheer inventiveness, Ragmop is off the charts. What raises Ragmop above a merely funny story is Walton's constant prodding about how topics such as organized Christianity and U.S. beliefs about how the world should be run, among others. Walton has a lot to say and phrases it very well. Unique is an overused term in comics, commonly applied to superhero comics with a new wrinkle, but Ragmop is the genuine article. So thank you to Frank for his very kind words and for seeing that Ragmop is, in fact, included in 1001 Comics You Must Read Before We Let You Die. So yes, Ragmop, animation infused. I grew up with Warner Brothers and Tex Avery and Hanna-Barbera, and those influences are very upfront and in the book. They're there to be acknowledged, and I'm not trying to be clever and just kind of slip things through. All the references I want you to see and I want you to enjoy within a new, more contemporary context. Because Alice Hawkings was a female protagonist in the 1990s, when I was doing this book, I decided to take a feminist bent and kind of explore what was perceived to be the misogynistic elements within comics at that time and in and around popular culture. So the reason why Alice Hawkings starts off as a villain named Thrill Kitten is because when she was young, she wanted to be a physicist. And I'm sorry, but girls, you don't become physicists. You know, that's just the way it is. So just get that out of your pretty little heads. Alice grew up always being told that she was a bad girl for being independently minded. And so the time came when she just decided, well, you know what, if I'm a bad girl, then I will be a bad girl. And thus, Thrill Kitten was born. But as these types of stories go, the more she tries to be bad, the more she fails. And when she's finally hired by the villains of the story to aid them in their quest for the O-ring, which was this device that can reset the known universe, Alice inadvertently assumes the mantle of hero and ultimately foils the attempts of the villains to achieve not only domination of the world, but of the universe itself. And the story is told as an old-style Marvel comic. We talked about, Frank mentioned the pinup pages, and the pinup pages do provide backstory for the comic. They're little pauses. They're almost like musical numbers. Well, there's our controversial portrayal of God, who's known as the Tetragrammaton in Ragmop. And this drawing is actually it's a caricature of my father on the toilet. So, thanks, Dad. He didn't have the big mustache, but I walked in on him once unexpectedly on the toilet, and obviously it traumatized me enough that it eventually made it into Ragmop. So these are the crazy things that come out of my head and into the story and make it all, which is hopefully a fun and interesting read for everybody. There is a political bent to Ragmop. Being created in the 1990s was during the anti-globalization movement, where people were very cognizant of corporations and the ill that they were doing in the world and working against the benefits for humanity and the globe in terms of just making profits over people. And so the heroes in the first volume here, Ragmop, A Brief History of Crime, the heroes tend to be more left-leaning and the villains more right-leaning. And this is reflective of the world in the 1990s and certainly in the early 2000s when I finally completed the book. And so, there's a nice picture of our villain. Up here he's upscaled, and then he downsizes back to his normal self. Upscale and downsizing were terms at the time, which I then adapted to become superhero catchphrases. Upsize, downsize. So that's a little bit about Ragmop. Besides the animation, I was heavily influenced, of course, by Mad Magazine. And again, Ragmop is very reflective of that. There's even a musical number in Ragmop. There's two musical numbers, actually. They kind of blend together, which were inspired by the musicals that Mad Magazine always did, musical parodies. So I always like to have a musical number in Ragmop, and there is a surprise musical number in Ragmop, The World Needs Laughter, as well. Don Martin is a constant source of inspiration for me. If you're not familiar with the cartooning of Don Martin, you might recognize it. His style is one of the most easily recognized styles of cartooning of the 1960s and 1970s. Throughout Ragmop, you will always find little references to Don Martin, and sometimes you will find rather big references to Don Martin, complete with Don Martin sound effects. And holding it all together is this Marvel-style Silver Age adventure story, which actually does have a beginning, a middle, and an end, and does wrap up with a nice little bow and a button towards the end. So hopefully, you know, after 400 pages, I think the story is actually about 397 pages, but you come to your moment of catharsis, the heroes triumph, the villains fail, and there's a slightly open ending there to leave room for the sequel, which eventually comes out as Ragmop, The World Needs Laughter. In my next video, I'm going to talk a little bit about how I took characters from the night that are reflective of politics and economics in the 1990s and in the early 2000s, the post 9/11 world, and how I update them to 2019, because obviously things have changed and things must change. And the biggest change, of course, was the world's loss of a sense of humor. And that's why this one's called The World Needs Laughter. And as to who wants to read this book, I would say primarily who I want to read this book are people who actually do have a sense of humor. And not just a sense of humor about your enemies, but a sense of humor about yourself. If you can't laugh at your own foibles, then perhaps Ragmop may not be for you, because we all make mistakes on either side, regardless of politics, regardless of gender, regardless of what side we represent here, there, up, down, this way, that way, as the scarecrow might say. We all have our shortcomings. And to be honest about it, we all need to laugh about ourselves. And if we can't laugh about ourselves, well, then we really are lost in the world. So next video, we will talk about Ragmop, The World Needs Laughter. And I can talk about other things as well. So if you want me to address other things, you can talk about things in the comments. And I can talk about, architecture and marine biology. I can talk about references that happened after 1995. And, it's not everything doesn't have to be the 20th century. I am a creature of the 21st century, and we can talk about that too. And we will talk about some of that when we discuss Ragmop, The World Needs Laughter. Thank you so much for your patience. Thank you so much for joining me. And thank you for your interest in my work and in Ragmop and in hopefully sharing a laugh together. All right, we'll see you next time. As the kids like to say, peace out. Time to hit the little red button.